All right, people, this is Harris Sultan, your favorite ex-Muslim atheist, and I have today another massive celebrity, one of the heroes of mine, Michael Shermer. Michael, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
That is excellent to hear, and I can see a lot of those books behind you. By the way, guys, I just read that book, Conspiracy. I think it's one hell of a book because Michael is one of those people who's always known for, like, yes, you are an atheist, yes, you do talk about science, reason, rationality, and all of those things. But one thing that I've always heard you that you've been massive on, and that is being skeptical about theories that people put out, such as JFK, UFO, this and that, all of that. But so why did you get to write this book on conspiracy theory? By the way, I know you've written a lot of books. I'm sorry, I've only read Conspiracy. I've still got a few pages to go. It's on my audiobook. Why did you feel the need to write it now? Like, shouldn't you have written it like 10 years ago?
Yeah, maybe. But 10 years ago, I was writing about other things like moral progress and the afterlife and other big questions. I don't know. I do kind of feel like this was the book I was meant to write. We started Skeptic magazine. Here's what it looks like, right? And 1992, and we've been covering conspiracy theories for 30 years. So it's always been in our wheelhouse. But just in general, I think both the media and academic scholars and scientists treated conspiracy theories as pretty fringy, not to be taken terribly serious, not a serious subject of study. And, sort of tinfoil hat wearing wackadoodles in their basement tweeting out things about JFK or whatever. But in fact, it should be apparent to everybody by now that, in fact, it's anything but fringe. Conspiracy theories have never been fringe. They've always been with us since the start of really civilization. I mean, people have always been suspect and suspicious that people behind closed doors are doing things that are not fair, moral, legal, etc. And the fact is, people often do things behind closed doors that are not fair, moral, or legal. And we know this. So much of my book actually deals with real conspiracy theories. That is, conspiracy theories that turn out to be true. That is, there are conspiracies. And so my central evolutionary argument is that we evolved a cognition to make more type 1 errors, assume conspiracy theories are true when they're not, as opposed to type 2 errors. That is, miss conspiracy theories that turn out to be true, because that can be more costly. So I think it's right up front. It's in everyday life. It's part of political life. Many wars have started over false conspiracy theories, or even true ones. And, so much of mainstream life is explained by it. So I felt the book was necessary at this time. Also, there's a fairly sizable body of scientific research over the last decade or so. So I wanted to summarize all that. Lots of different people working in this area. So I summarized that and added some of my own theoretical models to it, just to see if we can actually answer the question, why do people believe conspiracy theories? Or is the subtitle, why do rational people seem to believe irrational things?
So you did try to address that. Obviously, I think the first chapter is all about discussing why people believe in that. You quoted a lot of studies. Mm-hmm. So I know you touched base on motivated reasoning, and then I got to question my own self and being a skeptic myself. Like I've always said that if it sounds like a conspiracy theory, then just discard it initially. Just don't believe it. Don't take it as, okay, don't start from the position that, okay, this is true, now I'm going to investigate, because then you make up your mind. But then I thought, and I think you've been accused of that too, maybe, that aren't we also doing motivated reasoning, that we're thinking, hang on, just because it sounds like a conspiracy theory, I'm not going to believe in it?
Yes, exactly. So, my position is that we should start off skeptical of any claims, particularly claims that are extraordinary or challenge the mainstream, just by default, because most new ideas turn out to be false. So it's really just the null hypothesis in science applied to anything you hear. That is, assume it's probably not true until proven otherwise. And if the evidence is substantial, then you change your mind. You reject the null hypothesis and assume that the theory is true if the evidence warrants it. So as the Equerry principle says, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Ordinary claims, ordinary evidence. And so each of these has to be evaluated individually. If you say something like, well, I think Wall Street traders and some businesses conspire to cheat the regulatory state to gain an unfair profit. Well, that's not a crazy conspiracy theory. We know this happens all the time, which is why we have a regulatory state. It's why we have government agencies that monitor big corporations, because we all know that they'll cheat if they can get away with it. In the same way that athletes will do whatever they can to get away with it. So you got to have officials and umpires and referees in the game, or else it's not going to be fair. So that's what I'm arguing, and that in fact that doesn't require a massive amount of evidence. But if you say, well, Bill Gates is plotting to, control the world. He wants to, take over the world. He wants to monitor world population and control people. Okay, that's a pretty extraordinary claim. We know nobody can do that. No dictator in the history of the world has ever managed to conquer the world, right? So the chance that any one person is able to do this, he's rich, but he doesn't have political power. How would he do this, right? So that would require extraordinary evidence, of which there is none. And so it's just best to be skeptical of those big, grand conspiracy theories.
I want to move on from that, but then obviously, guys, this is Conspiracy. It is available on Amazon India as well, and obviously every other online bookstore. Definitely do read it. You'll learn a lot, and I'm going to try to pack as many questions as possible. So you mentioned like the infamous Bill Gates conspiracy theory, like he's trying to put something. Okay, now that's too far-fetched. Now I'm also generally, I don't. You don't know me that well, but I just want to make it clear that I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm always against that. When this COVID happened, don't you think that the track record that we see, and then again, I'm also not a big believer of big pharma conspiracy, blah blah blah. But as you mentioned yourself, these things do happen to some extent, because at the end of the day, they're there to make profit for the shareholders. Don't you think that these people become more paranoid because we do have this corruption at some scale, and then people are somewhat justified, because we'll never get to the truth. Now with this vaccine or whatever happened, and now other scientists are coming out and they're saying, well, hang on, maybe we jumped the gun, masks were not going to impact as much as we thought it would be. The lockdown could be a separate issue. Don't you think people are somewhat justified, and then it actually gives rise to their paranoia even more?
Yeah, so I would agree with that to a certain extent, that when there's great uncertainty and it's a threat, like COVID-19, that makes people ripe for conspiracism, and perhaps rationally so, because who knows what's actually going on. I mean, the Chinese government is not especially transparent about their goings-ons, and I see the lab leak hypothesis is back on the table. There was that report published last week by ProPublica in conjunction with Vanity Fair. I read it. It's like a 10,000 word piece. I mean, it's massive, but you should read it. It's like, okay. Or Matt Ridley, Matt Ridley's book Viral. He also makes the case, not for the lab leak, but that the lab leak hypothesis deserves serious attention, along with the zoonomic hypothesis for how the SARS-CoV-2 virus got into human populations, right? So, but no one's claiming that the Chinese government intentionally did this as a bioweapon. So it's not that kind of conspiracy theory. It's more like a conspiracy of cover-up. They're just not telling us everything. Well, that's not irrational to believe that. We know the Chinese government is not particularly transparent. Our own government is not especially transparent about a lot of things, right? By our government, I mean the United States government. So, it's not irrational. Now, what happens in an unfolding pandemic like that, where we really don't know, a lot of errors are made. So what looks to some people like conspiracy, like Anthony Fauci and the CDC are conspiring to take our freedoms away by getting us to wear masks. Now, I don't believe that. I think they made mistakes because they just didn't know. These are well-intentioned people trying to do the right thing. And I try to be sympathetic and, the principle of interchangeable perspectives. What would I say if I was in charge of the CDC and I was standing there before a group of media people with a microphone in my face, and they're saying, what should we do? Do we mask or do we not mask? Do we close the economy down, or not? Do we keep the schools open? Do we close the schools? What do you recommend? So if you err on the wrong side, you're a politician or you're a policy maker, and you say, well, I say we carry on business as usual and hope that the SARS-CoV-2 virus is not as deadly as HIV. Recall, HIV was 100% fatal until the drug cocktail came along. We still don't have a cure for HIV, or if it was maybe as bad as Ebola, on a mass scale, then you would be responsible for the deaths of tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, maybe billions of people, if it turned out to be, a catastrophe. So why not err on the side of caution and just, close things down, be super careful, tell everybody to mask, get the vaccines going, get the boosters going and all that, just in case. Now, in hindsight, we look back at, oh, well, it wasn't that bad, maybe worse than the flu, but not as bad as Ebola or anything even remotely close to that. Maybe just, a really bad flu and maybe a little bit more than that. But and the cost of closing the schools down was not trivial, at least in the United States where I've seen data. Our kids, students, grammar school students and middle school students are like 2 years behind now, particularly in math and English. And it's just, okay, so that wasn't free, right? What's the harm in closing everything down? Well, it's harmful on many levels, educationally, psychologically. Rates of depression are a little bit up now. And, deaths of suicide, alcoholism, drug addiction. Now, some of that was already going on anyway with the opioid crisis. Yeah. Yeah. So, and not to mention the economy and printing all that money. Maybe that's part explanation for inflation that we're going through now, right? So, but again, that's hindsight. We know now what we probably should have done, this or that, but under great uncertainty on something like that's potentially really threatening, people get more conspiratorial. By the way, let me point out, why is there no conspiracy theories about antibiotics, but there are about vaccines? Why is nobody worried about the big pharma making money on antibiotics? They make a lot of money on antibiotics. There's something about vaccines that triggers people that antibiotics don't. I'm not sure what it is. Something about injecting something into your body that's similar to the disease you're trying not to get feels kind of weird, right? So I don't know. There's something about that also. But why is nobody concerned about big pharma making money on antibiotics? You never hear that.
I think it's because it's preventative, and they think that, hang on, I'm healthy, my baby's healthy. I don't see any disease, so that's why I don't need anything. Maybe that could be it, and that's why they're injecting it, so they get the $10, $20 check or whatever from the government, and that's it. They're making money. I think, again, people, whenever people see something happening and they don't understand it, they always tie it with some sort of a evil man behind everything who's pulling all the strings.
Right.
Okay, so guys, do get this book. It's amazing. I've got loads to talk about from that book, but I want to move on from that. I was looking at your, and I think this should be on my next reading list. The Scientific Search for the Afterlife, Immortality, and Utopia. Now, I have a lot of Indian audience, and Indians, I don't know whether you know or not, or obviously you probably would when you were writing the book. Are you familiar with Jim Tucker? He is a psychologist from University of Virginia.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And
the reincarnation research.
Yeah. So he apparently studied 250 cases of children who were telling stories about their past lives. And there was no other explanation other than the fact that, yep, this is the second rebirth. And I think he quotes some studies. And this is actually very, very famous in India. And as you know, India is a massive country. So, like if you say anything which confirms a confirmation bias, it blows up. So how do you answer that? I mean, I try to tell them, come on, it needs more evidence, because scientifically, first of all, explain to me what value Jim Tucker's work has in the scientific world. Because it's in University of Virginia, it's written there like, recommended reading this book. So what's its value in the scientific world? And then obviously from skeptic point of view, like how would you counter those arguments?
Well, in the scientific community, there's not much value placed on it at all. I mean, most scientists, just take people that would be interested in this, social scientists, psychologists, anthropologists, or whatever. They treat it more as a belief system that would be interesting to study, not whether it's true or not. And the reason for that is they, in a kind of Bayesian way, their priors tell them, this would apply to me too, that it's very, very unlikely that reincarnation could be true, that In fact, even the principle of the dualistic idea that there's a brain and a mind, a body and a soul, there's corporeal and incorporeal, physical and non-physical, and so forth. Most scientists reject that out of hand for lack of evidence across the board. And that, the laws of physics are pretty well known now. And there's no room for really kind of that kind of dualism where there's, something besides your physical brain, that the memories are, sort of stored in some kind of ether that's floating around up there. Call it a quantum field if you want to modernize it. But and then therefore when you die, it floats off your brain, or your soul floats out of your body and it goes into some other body or some other animal or whatever. And there's, first of all, there's no evidence for that, even in principle, like in physics. But so then we're left with mostly anecdotes. So what Tucker's trying to do, and his predecessors before him at that program, to their credit, at least try to quantify some measure of how you could tell if somebody was reincarnated of a now dead person. And so this usually involves birthmarks, scars on the body, and lots of stories. Children that tell stories about seemingly something they couldn't know anything about, of some person who lived decades ago or centuries ago. And so here's where the subjective element comes in as far as a scientific skeptic is concerned. What's the operational definition of a hit? That somebody is definitely reincarnated from some dead person. They have their personality, their soul in them. By the way, there's a few other kind of philosophical problems with that. If my body inhabits somebody else's soul, where's my soul? Or do I have two souls? Does when the soul of the dead person enters me when I'm 5 or whatever, what happens to my soul that I was born with? Does that leave? Does it go to somebody else and souls are just swapping around, or do people have multiple souls? Okay, so these are important questions that there's no consensus amongst people who believe in reincarnation of how to explain that. And then of course there's the population problem. That the number of people that have lived before us is about 100 billion, and there's about 8 billion of us now. So if everybody gets reincarnated, and maybe the answer is they don't, but if everybody does, where do that means there's 8 billion people alive now, as of next week, I guess we hit 8 billion. And so, do each of us have something like 17 different souls floating around in us?
No, it could mean that, okay, the past ones, they've gone into a cockroach or a bee or something, because they do believe in that as well. So
that would solve the population problem. But the biggest beef that people that have looked into this, skeptics, it does come down to this subjective evaluation of a story. So this 5-year-old kid tells a story about some event or some person from decades ago. Apparently couldn't know anything about it, although sometimes that's questionable. Is that a hit? Well, what about the counterfactuals? What about children that have really great stories about things and no one connects them at all? Those are the misses. Or if reincarnation was true and somebody didn't have a story, why is that? Is that because they weren't reincarnated? So in other words, it's kind of a signal detection problem. How do you know that the signal in the noise is real, or it's just still more noise? So my contention, having looked at this, is that they have not reached the point of rejecting the null hypothesis. That is to say, there is no such thing as reincarnation. These are just stories. That the scars are accidental, they're random. In the same way that during the witch crazes, the witch hunters claimed they could tell if a woman had been possessed by a demon, or had sex with a demon, or was in some way interacting with a demon because of the marks on their body. And they would go in search of these marks. And so what constituted evidence was, anything. It could be a mole, could be a scar, could be a sun damage to the skin, whatever. And, they just, with the confirmation bias and so on, they just, kind of hand waved and decided, yeah, this one's a witch and that one's not. And it's not much better than that, in my opinion.
So how would you, for example, there's one very famous one, a lot of Indians, people who believe in these reincarnation stories. How would you say that? But yes, you've given a general overlook. Like, okay, there was this child, I think it was in Sri Lanka or something, 5 or 6 years old. She tells the story to her mum that I was sitting by the river or something, and my brother pushed me in, and I drowned. And then they found out a couple of villages away, there was a girl who was pushed by her brother, and I think Tucker used that in his book, that and he said that's one of the strongest ones. So I say, I mean, I try to answer it. I mean, obviously, I'm trying to be as just putting it generally, that it is quite possible that somebody would have known and they would have said that in front of the kid when the kid was like 3 or 4 years old, would have heard that, and then we all create false memories. We all feel that. How would you answer that? That's what.
Well, that is one answer, yes. And I'm not familiar with that particular case, but others I've looked into. It turns out when you drill down a little bit, you found out the kid watched some TV show where this was a kid that claimed to be reincarnation of a World War II fighter pilot whose plane was shot down and he was burned to death and then crashed. And that the kid, kind of had dreams about being on fire, had kind of detailed memories of World War II airplanes and so on. But then the people that investigated this found out, well, this kid was really into World War II, really loved planes and ships and soldiers and stories about World War II, which I remember this because when I was 5, I couldn't get enough of it. It's just a hugely popular subject. I used to study all the different planes and ships and tanks and stuff used in World War II. I knew a lot about that subject, probably without my parents really even realizing how much I knew about it, just from watching TV and reading books and so forth. So yeah, there's some of that. But also, what about the counterfactuals? What about all the people who died in the past of plane crashes or horrific drownings or whatever, and there's no stories about them anywhere, or that people can't find any stories about them? Why don't we count those as misses? Right. So in other words, you can't just count the hits. Like when psychics do a reading, or astrologers, tarot card readers, palm readers do a reading, people just remember the hits. Oh my God, he got the name of my aunt who passed over. She figured out what my father died of or whatever. Well, what about all the misses? Because if you tape record these readings, the psychic or tarot card reader, astrologer will make hundreds and hundreds of comments and ask hundreds of questions in the course of like a half hour or a 1 hour reading. I know because I've done this. I've tape recorded them. And you just sit there with a little counter going, miss, 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 hit, miss, 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 hit. It's mostly misses, and people only remember the hits, and they can't even remember the misses. And I played them back for them under, like, here's the video. Like for a TV show we did, we recorded the whole thing, and people swore I never told them the name of my passed over father, because the psychic says something like, I'm getting an R name. I don't know what this is, or an M name, a Michael, maybe a Mark or whatever. And then the person will go, oh, my father's name was Manny. Oh yes, Manny. Yeah. Okay. And then later they'll go, how did he get the name of my father? Manny. It's like, he didn't, you told him. No, I didn't. And then you play the tape back and they go, oh my God, I did. Right. So memories are very fallible, very, very much open to the power of suggestion. And mentalists use this a lot. I don't know if you've seen Darren Brown's specials in the UK. I mean, he's a great mind reader. He's very clever the way he does things. And to his credit, he says none of this is real magic. It's all fake. It's all trickery. And people still, he tells stories about this. Still afterwards, they go, yeah, but how does the magic work? Like, can you connect me to my lost grandfather? He says, no, I can't. It's a trick. She goes, yeah, but how did you do it? It's like, I can't tell you. Right. So to me, it's all in that same genre of, again, it's dualism. It's natural. People naturally feel like they're more than just their body and brain. That the natural default position in cognition is dualism. Almost nobody's naturally a monist. Scientists are, but most people are not. So this is why almost everybody believes in the soul, the afterlife, and so on. I mean, if I ask you, imagine yourself dead, you can't do it. You literally can't, because to imagine something, you have to be alive. So it's like, imagine going out from anesthesia, which lots of us have had done. There's no experience at all. It's just lights out. And in the case of death, you just don't wake up again. There's no experience to have. And yet people can't grasp that. It's just not natural.
One last point on reincarnation. I actually had a debate with a Hindu apologist who was massive on reincarnation. And he just raised this point that how do you explain that certain kids are born with deformities or disabilities? I was like, well, that's, there could be genetic reasons, there could be all sort of reasons. But this is where I said that reincarnation, or if we look at it from the Hindu point of view, that's actually a wicked idea, because the belief says that if you do some evil acts in this world, then you will be punished. So he was implying that, okay, if you're born with a disability or something, then it means you're being punished for something. And I think that's very wicked to say that this poor child who's got, who hasn't done anything wrong, is just purely working within the laws of nature, whatever disability they have. And just to label that, oh, hang on, you did something wrong in your past life. So I think that's pretty wicked.
It is wicked. And the reverse is also wicked. The secret, that there are occult forces at work, and if you want something, you can get it. And people that are successful in life have attracted the wealth and success to them by thinking positive thoughts. Okay, that sounds nice, right? Kind of part of the self-help movement. But what about the people that are poor? Did they just have bad thoughts? Are you seriously going to blame some poor kid born in Somalia who, has nothing, just born in utter abject poverty? You're going to blame this kid for not thinking positive thoughts, or the parents for not thinking positive? I mean, come on, right? It's just not how the world works. There's so much randomness and chance, forces at work you have no control over. I often just feel like I'm lucky. I got lucky that I was born in the late 20th century. Lucky I was born in a Western country that's, fairly well off. And, just there's a lot of those things you just have no control over. My parents were nice. Lucky me. I didn't pick my parents, right? I could have had, evil, abusive parents, but I didn't. It's no credit to me, right? So I think most of us should show a little more gratitude for the fortune we have, and quit blaming people for, not being successful or whatever. It's mostly not their fault.
With these kind of ideas are like reincarnation, heaven and hell, and karma is another one. I mean, they're always wrapped around this beautiful packaging, and they sell themselves as a good idea. Look, you got to be nice, there's a bright side to it. If you be nice, you're gonna come back as some higher caste person, or like maybe you as you said, you're lucky that you're born in a fairly well-off Western country, your parents were nice, etc. But had you done something bad in your past life, you might have been born in some slum. So that's why I think people are attracted to this, because like karma, like it became fashionable. Oh, karma is a good thing, karma is a bitch, or whatever. Now, how do you see, as a skeptic, don't you think that it actually does more harm to our society as a whole?
Oh, for sure.
Than good?
Oh, I'm in complete agreement with you on that. We want to know what's true. Now, the counter to everything you just said, of which I agree, is that maybe it works for some other reason, right? If you behave badly in this life, you might come back, in some lower form of life, and you'll be miserable. Therefore, you should be good, right? It's like the Christian version. You're going to go to hell if you have premarital sex and you drink too much, or you're abusive if you're a sinner. In a way, it's a kind of a way of keeping people in line. I think of it as, the rise of religion happened around the same time as government. And, government is kind of a secular, earthly form of law enforcement and moral enforcement of the norms. And religion is the backup. Even if you think you got away with it because the police didn't see you or whatever, there's an eye in the sky, like you're living in China, right? We know everything you're doing. In a way, that's what God is. It's like Santa Claus. He sees you when you're sleeping. He sees you when you're awake. He knows when you've been bad or good. So you better be good, right? So I see reincarnation as, as kind of maybe it, I don't know that much about it historically, but maybe it arose for the same purposes as religion did, as a way of kind of nudging people to do the right thing and be a good person.
I once asked someone, and I said, what's your favorite conspiracy theory? And he said religion. Do you actually think that religion might have started off as it's a common saying that religion was to control people? So then in that case, it's a conspiracy, right? It's like,
yes,
okay,
of sorts, although it's generally not done in secret. Like most conspiracy theories involve people doing something secretly without your consent, without your knowledge. Most religions, at least modern ones, are done with people's consent and knowledge. They know what's going on. it's it's kind of a rational choice in their mind. Whether it's rational or not is a different question, but they feel like it is. And so that would be a different kind of conspiracy, more like just kind of a contrived social experiment to manipulate people, even though they know what's going on. Unless now here it would tip into conspiracism or maybe cultism, like Scientology, where the members don't find out what's really going on until it's too late, or they're so far down the rabbit hole they can't get out. Like in Scientology, it seems harmless enough. We're going to help people with drug addiction. We're going to, man the soup kitchens. We're going to, help people achieve their life goals. That all sounds good, right? My example of this is Jim Jones and the disaster of 900 people in Jonestown in Guyana. He started off in California, in the Bay Area near San Francisco in the 60s and 70s, especially integrating the churches. He was the first integrated church in San Francisco, actually embraced people of color into the church, which was not done. Racism was still fairly rampant. And he worked with a lot of people to help, again, man the soup kitchens, help poor people, get homeless people off the street. He worked with the governor, Jerry Brown, who was governor later again of California. You can see pictures of him online with famous politicians and celebrities in San Francisco. And so the people that joined Jim Jones's church, they weren't joining a cult. Nobody joins a cult. They join some group that they think is good. And probably it was at the start, right? But then he got into drugs and alcohol and illicit sex and manipulation of people's autonomy, their money, and so on. It just got worse and worse until the state started looking in on it, and then he fled and went to South America. And then the famous congressional committee that went down there by Congressman Ryan, and then he had him murdered. And that was the end of the rope. So, but by the time you get to there, you're talking 15, 20 years, down the road from what started off as a good thing, right? So to that extent, I suppose religions could go down that dark path, and some of them have, but for the most part, it's a little more upfront.
I think, help me understand, because I think in religions, established religions, people actually don't know what's going on, because we don't know what happened in 7th century Arabia or what Jesus was doing. Did he even exist or not?
Right.
We actually don't know. And then it came down. Constantine accepted Christianity as a straight religion of the Roman Empire, and then obviously Islam spread politically through warfare, conquest in the Middle East, and then it just came down generationally. So wouldn't you think that and in the Far East with Malaysia, Indonesia, just the leaders accepted Islam, and then as a result, people underneath, they just converted to Islam themselves because it's politically beneficial for you to have the state religion, because you're going to get more benefits. Whereas in cult, you have the leader. I think it was Weinstein. I think he said that the main difference between cult and religions is that in cults, you have the founder around you and he's controlling everything. Whereas in religions, like the main inventor is no longer there, and then just people using their own reasoning and making up stuff as they go along, like Pope and then obviously clergy in the Islamic world.
Yeah, we see this in Mormonism, because it's a new enough religion we can track it historically fairly accurately, whereas Christianity and Islam and Judaism are lost in the midst of time so long ago. People just end up accepting it on faith, although most Mormons do, even though you can point to their history that happened fairly recently, just in the 19th century. When Joseph Smith died, he's the founder of the Mormon religion, Church of Latter-day Saints, Jesus Christ Church of Latter-day Saints, better known as Mormons. He's the guy that kind of translated the golden tablets he claimed he had discovered in his backyard in Palmyra, New York. And a few of his buddies attested to they saw the gold plates too. And he translated them from this reformed hieroglyphics into English through these magic stones he put in a hat. He put his face in the hat. I mean, it's a crazy story, right? Do people really believe that? I suspect probably not. It's probably more like, I grew up in Mormonism, and I like what it does for me. They do a lot of social good for people, particularly in Utah. What happened there, Smith was murdered. First of all, he was something of a con man. So he got chased out of New York, and he went to Illinois, where he also was a con man, and he got chased out of there, except he didn't escape it, and he was killed. And then, so his second in command, Brigham Young, took the group and they went to Utah, which was not a state. It was just a territory of the United States. And they were pretty much free to do whatever they wanted because there was nothing out there. I mean, it's really true. Even now you go there, except for Salt Lake City and a few of the big cities and ski resorts, there's just nothing out there. It's just that you just drive and drive for hundreds of miles. You see nothing, even now, right? So they really got away from it. And it could have died there, but Brigham Young was a charismatic and strong leader who kind of revived the cult and brought it into mainstream religion. And now there's, I don't know, what, 6, 7, 8 million American Mormons. And, you know, they even had a candidate for president of the United States in 2012. Mitt Romney is a Mormon, and so on. And they're not crazy people. They're just regular people. So when we say, did they really believe it? Well, believe what? You know, I mean, if you really press the case, you believe the whole gold plates thing, not to mention the whole polygamy thing. You know, they were monogamous like everybody else. And then Joseph Smith, we know this story, nicely recounted in Under the Banner of Heaven by John Krakauer, amazing book, in which Joseph Smith took up with a young lady down the street that he was in love with, along with his wife. He's in love with his wife too. And he was conflicted. What do I do? And so he hatched this idea. I know, God told me I should do this, right? So Krakauer recounts this scene where he's, you know, talking to his wife. Now, honey, you're not going to believe this, but I was talking to God, and He said I have to have sex with this other woman. Of course, his wife Emma, she's like, "What? Are you out of your mind? No way. In that case, I'm gonna take on extra husbands." Well, no, you know, we talked to God about that. He was very clear. It's just for the guys.
Didn't he also say, but didn't he also say, "Oh, if you don't believe me, ask my friends. They were also there at the pub."
Exactly
By the way, this is a very similar story to Prophet Muhammad as well. He had the hots for his adopted son's wife, Zainab, and then he realized, the adopted son realized, "Hang on, babe, does my adopted father like this my wife?" And then he asked, he goes, "Well, can I marry you? Oh, if you want her, you can have her." And then Prophet said, no, I don't want it. And then the verse comes down and it says, "Oh, Muhammad, we know what's in your heart. So, you know, we have already wedded you with her." So it was so convenient.
Yes.
All right, moving on. I don't know how happy you are to talk about this. You became very famous. I actually spoke a couple of weeks ago with an Indian YouTuber who saw your clip, the infamous debate you had, or conversation you had, Sam Harrison, you versus Deepak Chopra. I know you met up with him afterwards. You say you have a very good relationship, etc. But that was the first time I heard the word woo-woo from you, and I was like, oh, okay, that's useful. So how far has it gone? Like, I mean, Deepak Chopra, not that I'm a big fan, I'm sorry, but whenever I heard him, like, my head's like, what's going on? There was another conversation on Richard Dawkins with him, and Professor Dawkins, he got really upset, and he said, well, people, when he was just doing quantum this, quantum that, and people were like clapping, and he goes, "Do you understand what he said?" He said, that somebody must have said yes, and then say, "You're lying. Nobody understands what it's saying." So
I was there. I was sitting in the front row of that. That was at City of Ideas in Puebla, Mexico. Yes, I remember that. Richard, he got pretty animated. Deepak can be infuriating, and he was at that time kind of poking the hornet's nest himself a little bit against Dawkins in particular. I mean, yes, we're friends, but that doesn't mean we agree with each other. I think I have fundamental disagreements with Deepak for sure. And a lot of his online ramblings sound like just complete word salad if you don't know what he's coming from. I mean, he's using words in a way that most people do not use the words. He means them in a particular way, the way he interprets quantum mechanics, or, you know, that kind of a Western Buddhist style of spiritualism, his own form. He's not a dualist. He says he's a monist. Everything is consciousness, and physical matter is simply a manifestation of consciousness, and so on. And then he goes down the rabbit hole of jargon, right? That, consciousness is the ground of all being. Like, what does that mean? Right? It's like that tweet machine that, cranks out Deepak tweets, some of which are real, some of which are fake. Can't tell the difference. Okay. So that I agree with. I wish he was more precise, linguistically. And in science, you have to be. So a lot of scientists don't take him seriously because, he's very much a practitioner, and as well as wanting to be taken seriously as a researcher. He does do some research that's interesting, but mostly he's talking to popular people that are into this sort of thing. And he does have a big audience. I was in that audience in Mexico with the Richard Dawkins one. The audience was mostly on Deepak's side. You could feel it. I was like cheering as loud as I could and clapping to support Richard, because it's like, man, is there nobody but me here to support Richard? This is not cool. Come on. Right. So I think a lot of people want to believe it. And again, back to what you were saying about a religion, I think, whether a Muslim believes this or that about what Muhammad was doing, or whether Jesus was literally physically resurrected from the dead, or the burning bush with Moses and so on. I think the details are less important than what they represent. So I call this, with conspiracy theories, proxy conspiracism. Like with Pizzagate, whether Hillary Clinton was really running a secret satanic pedophile ring out of a pizzeria or not is really not what's at stake there. What it stands for is, we don't like Democrats, we don't like the Clintons, we don't like Hillary. The whole left, they're all bad. They're all evil people. We don't like them. Whether this particular thing here is true or not, that's beside the point. It stands for something else. And I think that's the case with much religious dogma. I think most people really don't give it that much thought. Like if you press people on, the resurrection, do you really think somebody was dead for 3 days and then he came back to life? That's never happened. 100 billion people lived and died. Not one has come back. If you kind of present it as a Bayesian argument, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. How good is the evidence that Jesus was resurrected? Not very good. And if the evidence was good, then why aren't Muslims Christians? Why aren't Jews Christians? And they're not, and they because they don't think the evidence is that good. Right? Anyway, so you can go through all that, but people aren't going to go, oh yeah, you make a good point. I think I won't be a Christian anymore, or I'll give up Islam, or I'll give up Judaism. No, that never happens, because that isn't really why they believe. I believe because these 6 arguments are so convincing. I couldn't believe otherwise. That's not it. It's such that if you debunk the 6 arguments, they'll go, okay, I was wrong. That's because that's not really it.
You mentioned that in your book, that we behave like lawyers, where we have all these ideas, or we have this conclusion, and then we build our arguments around it. Whereas scientists works differently. Scientists tries to be unbiased and tries to collect empirical data and then put the conclusions forward. This makes me wonder, why is that the reason why, although the initial sudden rise of the new atheist movement, as it's called in 2005, Lawrence Krauss and Dawkins, Harris, and all these guys. I mean, you guys became our heroes for that reason. I'm from one of those generations when I was listening, consuming hundreds of hours of your videos, and then I learned that. But now we see there was another shift in 2014, 15, something that Christopher Hitchens might have predicted, because he did see that this wokeism, this offense culture was growing in the left as opposed to the right. For example, in the Muslim world, the right beheads us for saying, hey, I no longer believe in Allah and Muhammad. But the West was not supposed to be like that. And the liberal values were definitely not like that. Universities were not supposed to be safe spaces. These were spaces where you can argue and disagree and put forward arguments. What happened in 2014, 15, and then since then up to now? It's been 7-8 years. And obviously the trans movement and cancel culture, wokeism, all of these things came in. My question to you is, where did we go wrong? Now we see people like Jordan Peterson. Now, again, I don't know how much you read him or what. To me, it's just fancier version of a rich man's Deepak Chopra, maybe slightly better, but I don't understand what he's trying to say. And it's not just me, a lot of people, but a lot of so-called reason, pro-rationality, skeptical people. They're more popular. And I know some other people like Milo Yiannopoulos and all those guys, but these guys are very popular, and the OGs, so to speak, were not getting as many views. What happened? What went wrong?
The who's not getting as many views?
The OGs, Dawkins and Sam Harris, and people are more interested in this conservative. It's just a natural cycle of peaks and troughs.
Well, okay, let's address Jordan specifically, because I think that's a unique case there, in which something like Deepak Chopra, he's offering something that people obviously want, they need some kind of structure. Perhaps it's, there's different theories about this across the board. To address the first part of your question, what went wrong? Well, one theory is that it's the rise of secularism, the decline of religion, and it's people have a hole that needs to be filled, some kind of social structure or leader or somebody to tell us what's the right thing to do. And on the kind of secular left, with progressivism, wokeism, and so forth, John McWhorter, his book on this whole subject equates it as a religion. It's a kind of secular religion where you have an original sin. You're a racist, you're a misogynist, you're born this way, and you have to ask for forgiveness and atone for your sins. And there has to be a savior or multiple saviors or saints, people like Ibram X. Kendi and so on. So this is his argument. I think it's a reasonable one. I think that there's something to be said for that. There's some other strands, Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt in their book, The Coddling of the American Mind. They tag that year 2014 as about the time that the kids that were raised in the 90s were coming of age, going to college. And in the 90s, they were helicopter parented. That is to say, there was kind of a culture of safetyism, very risk-averse parents because of the high crime wave in the 70s and 80s. Those of us that were growing up then became parents in the 90s, and we were, paranoid about bad things happening to our kids. So we coddled them and helicopter parented them and so on. And those kids then are more fragile. And so they're more susceptible to belief systems, whatever. Okay, that's the second theory. And there's some merit to that as well. Now, Jordan in particular, I know Jordan pretty well. I've written about him. I wrote an essay called Have Archetype Will Travel. You can look it up. Shermer, or if you just go Shermer, Jordan Peterson, you'll find it. I like Jordan. He's a good guy. I think he, like Deepak, is trying to help people. And what is it that people are resonating with what he says? Things like, make your bed, clean your room, take care of yourself, your diet, work out, have a plan, write down your goals, treat people nice. Just really kind of basic stuff that, didn't you get this from your parents? Is what my first reaction when people are going, oh my God, this is incredible. It's like, my parents taught me all this stuff. I mean, maybe, but again, maybe I'm just lucky. Maybe most people grow up and they get no structure at all. Maybe they get no, like, how to be successful in life lesson from where your dad or mom or both sit you down and go, okay, here's how the world works. Here's what you got to do. I don't know. Maybe I got lucky because I got into sports early, and sports, you have to be pretty disciplined and train, work out, practice every day. And, maybe that's it. I didn't go to the military because the Vietnam War had just wrapped up, and that was not a good thing to do, is go in the military. That's different now. But for sports gave me that. A lot of people, I think, now go into the military because it gives them structure. You're getting up at 5 a.m. and you're going to work out, and then you're going to eat, and then you're going to work out, and you're going to do this, and you're going to nap, and you're going to go to bed. And I think a lot of people, they need that. And I think he meets that goal without the kind of preachiness of regular religions, right? He's just kind of giving advice. Here's what I think. Here's my 12 rules, and do with them what you want. And so it's a little less preachy, I think, than mainstream religions, which to young people, we know because they're leaving in droves. The rise of the nuns. I think young people just find organized religion, boring. It's just irrelevant. It's not hip, not cool. Whereas Jordan he's kind of cool. He's fat, right? And I think people find something of value there. I mean, if he wouldn't be where he is now. I mean, I've been to a couple of his events. There's like 3,000 people. I mean, how many intellectuals can draw audiences like that? Almost none. Maybe Stephen Hawking, all right, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Richard Dawkins, maybe.
He used to.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. You guys used to.
Yeah. So I think probably that's it. So let's reflect just a little bit more on this kind of thinking out loud. The decline of religion. You do need social capital. We need rules. We're moral beings. We need norms to go by. Part of the problem with, I think, the progressive left is they want to kind of burn down the whole system because it's obviously has flaws. Yeah, it does. And there's still issues. Yep, there are. And so let's just take it all down and start, just like defund the police. Well, you've just handed it over to the right. It's just crazy. I mean, nobody thinks that's a good idea. Right. So one of the values of conservatism, kind of Burkean conservatism, Edmund Burke, the original conservative intellectual, argued that the American Revolution was good, the French Revolution was bad. What's the difference? The American Revolution kept most of the institutions that were working and just got rid of a few, like the monarchy. But the French Revolution, let's just burn it all down and start over. We're going to have a new calendar, new days of the week. Everything starts over. We're getting rid of everything. And, a couple of years later, there's tens of thousands of people had their heads cut off, or whatever it was, 100,000. The guillotine, the bloodbath, and what they get out of all that? Napoleon. Okay, yeah. You get what you asked for, I guess. So I would say maybe it's something like that that we're going through now.
I hope it might change, because with Jordan Peterson, as I said, it's just those things. It just leaves more people confused. Like, I mean, there are a lot of things that actually make sense. A lot of people like it. I like a lot of things about his stance on certain topics. But like when he's asked, "Oh, do you think resurrection happened?" and then he says, "Well, I'm going to need 3 hours to explain that." Excuse yes. me, why do you need 3 hours to explain that? Somebody asked him, "Do you believe in a God?" And then he says, "What do you mean by believe? What do you mean by God?" Okay, maybe I need to give him a dictionary or something. I don't know. I just don't get it. I'm just going to get a move on with this, because we're running out of time. So just rapid questions for you, Heretic Artist. Thank you very much. Zagros is asking, is it a conspiracy that there is a massive infiltration of woke LGBTQ ideology into governments, education, K-12, university, etc., and an attempt to shape laws in contradiction with science in the West?
I would say not a traditional conspiracy theory, because most conspiracy theories involve kind of top-down control, some agent, some powerful person doing something in secret. This movement is more of a bottom-up, more like a social movement, a moral panic or a moral campaign, whatever. And again, these people, as I said, no one joins a cult. No, none of these people that are doing this, say protesting George Floyd's murder, the BLM movement, the Me Too movement, none of them think, we've been brainwashed, or we're in a cult, or, they think they're doing something really good. And again, without it going into too extreme, it is good. I mean, protest is how you bring about social change. That's fine. That's good. It's just when it goes too far. So how does it get into government agencies, corporations, schools? It does that from the bottom up very transparently. I mean, Ibram X. Kendi is the leader of the anti-racist movement. He's just openly blatant about it. There's no secret doctrines there. It's all published. It's on his website. You can watch endless YouTube videos of him explaining all this stuff. I disagree with him, but it's out there. So it's not secret in that sense. And then you have teachers adopting it because they feel like, well, I want to do something to help this social problem. What can I do? Oh, I can educate my students about racism and misogyny. Okay. That used to be a good thing, right? But again, it's when it goes too far. In this particular case, I'll identify what I think the problem is that it's ignoring everything that's has happened in the last 50 years and all the moral progress we've made since the civil rights movement in the 1960s, and the women's rights movement in the 1970s, and the gay rights movement in the 1990s and 2000s. And, we've come a long ways. And so to act like things are as bad as they've ever been is to discount the work of the great civil rights activists of the last half century. And it should be okay to hold two ideas at the same time in your head. Things are better than they've ever been, and we still have problems to solve.
Right. Next question is it a conspiracy that Western Europe is under Muslim invasion, quote unquote? If not, to what degree is there a threat? And are measures like banning religious symbols, for example, hijabs in France, from K-12 good ways to fight radicalization?
Interesting. Yes, again, the conspiracy suggests a top-down intent. Well, let's say when Angela Merkel opened the borders up for Germany of all those Syrian refugees, and the consequences were substantial, but it wasn't a secret. She said, this is why I'm doing this. I mean, given our history in Germany, treating outsiders and minorities, we should do the right thing and help. And we should all feel like we want to help people that are in oppressive countries. Like here in the United States, all these people from Central America coming up through Mexico to get into the United States. These aren't bad people. These are people that want the American dream. Why are conservatives treating them like they're pigs, like they're awful, they're criminals? This is, America. We're all immigrants except for the Native Americans. And, ask the Native Americans how they feel about immigrants. They'll tell you, right? So I find that a little disturbing. But it's, again, because of polarization, it's either black or white. You're either you want to open up the borders, let everybody in. You want to close the borders and don't let anybody in. No one's arguing either of those, right? It's like, what would a rational immigration policy look like? And to most activists, that's just too boring. We want revolution. We want to go march and do something. And, so I don't know what the correct answer is to your Zagros's question here. I don't think it's a secret that, Muslim leaders in the UK say, for example, want more Muslims to come in. I think they're fairly open about it. But, what's the policy? The different kinds. I'm not sure there's a right answer to political questions like immigration. Like here in the United States, I think Biden signed off on 150,000 immigrants a year. Okay, what's the right number? There is no right number. Maybe it's 50,000, maybe it's 250,000. It just depends who's in power and so on. And, so.
But isn't that why we get so polarized that then because on the left, we get this idea that, okay, let everyone come in. Now, I'm obviously an immigrant myself and a person of color. So I'm like, okay. And you need to work hard. You need to qualify through immigration, legal process, whatever, or just jump on a boat. And again, obviously, there are war-torn countries. There are people who are desperate, and I understand all of that. I come from a third world country. I come from Pakistan, although I came as a legal migrant. But then, because of this attitude by the left, then we see people like Trump. They say, well, I'm going to build a wall and I'm going to put a big fat door in the middle where people can come in. So I'm not closing America for everyone, but I'm letting people come in, but through legal channels. Don't you think they hide behind that because of that? Even though we know that white supremacists, that they don't want any immigration, they want white Australia policy. We have that right. white American policy.
Yeah, I agree. That's a problem, and it's so polarized that it's hard to have a rational discussion. Again, if you said, well, what would a rational immigration policy look like? People would just be like, what? I mean, I think most people don't give it that much thought. There's studies on this. For example, if you ask people, people say, I'm for NAFTA or I'm against NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. If you ask them, well, what is NAFTA? Most of them don't even know what it stands for, much less what's in it, who's in it, what are the trade policy. They don't know. They don't care. That's not what it's really about. It's about something else. They're for free trade, they're against free trade, whatever it is that is underlying it. So I do think that's, that's what makes it hard to answer those questions.
Right. We've got a couple of minutes left. Quick answers. Michael Shermer, where's the dividing line between hate speech and free speech?
Well, I have almost no dividing line. To me, it's just let people have their say, except with the obvious exceptions, libel and slander, saying things about people that harms them, like the Alex Jones case, his fake conspiracy theories. Nothing wrong about promoting conspiracy theories that are fake. That's free speech. But if it ends up hurting people, that is to say his followers, his lunatic followers harass these poor parents that are already grieving for years and years. Several of them had to move their homes many times. I mean, it's just no good. Now, to what extent is he responsible? Are his words responsible for what other people do? That to me is a debatable subject. My free speech lawyer friends, legal scholars on free speech, tell me it's a pretty high bar in the United States. That is, let's just take Trump in his speech on January 6th, 2021, that morning. We're going to go down there and we're going to be strong. I'm going to be there with you. They're stealing our country right now. They're over there. They're stealing our country. Let's go down there right now. He did throw in a little peacefully. But it was too late. Is he responsible for the mob action? So far, no. So far, the State Department has prosecuted the actual people who went into the Capitol dome, not Trump. And I'm told that it would be really hard to convict him in a court, that his words were responsible. It's a really interesting question, because then it gets down to back to cults. Charles Manson was convicted for murder in the Tate LaBianca murders in 1969, August 9th, 1969, August 8th and 9th. But he wasn't at either of the residences. His girls did this, and Tex Watson. They murdered the people. So how did Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecuting attorney for LA's district attorney office, how did he do that? He convinced the jury that Manson had so much control over these girls that his words, go do the following, were causal, that he is culpable. And he managed to get the girls convicted, that they were also, I'm calling them girls, young women, they were adults, and that they were also culpable. That's a pretty hard thing to pull off. But it brings up the question of, free will, determinism. To what extent should people be held accountable for their actions? And, it's a case by case deal, I think. For me, I think we should err on the side of free speech. Just let people have their say. If you don't want just take the cancel culture on university. If you don't like a speaker coming to your campus, don't go. I'll tell you what speakers hate, because I'm a public speaker. You know what they hate more than protesters? Nobody showing up for your talk. Right. And people like Milo Yiannopoulos, oh my God, they just eat it up. They can't wait for the crazies to come out and throw things and yell and scream and make noisemakers. There was one going around today, Ann Coulter, the kind of far right provocateur she has been, gave a talk at Cornell. That's her alumna. She was got her college degree from Cornell, and the protesters came out and they're screaming and yelling at her, and now this is a viral video. I mean, I don't know how she feels, because I don't know her personally, but my guess is people like her, they love this stuff. They get to promote these videos. Look at the lunatic left, and then everybody on the left gets tainted with that video. Like, this is what liberals do. The libtards, they're crazy. Of course, most of them are not like that at all.
Yeah.
And you go to a college campus, you don't see this going on. It's not like a daily affair. So anyway, I think. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Yeah, and I think you're right. I'm really upset with the far left hijacking the words like liberal and left, because like there's so many sane liberal people who want people to talk. We want to engage people in a debate and conversation. A lot of us hate this cancel culture and all that, but still, it seems like the loudest people always get the most attention. Guys, that was Michael. Yep.
Let me just make one more comment about that, because since you brought up Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and so on, they're all liberal. Steven Pinker, Richard Dawkins, Dan Dennett, Sam Harris, they're all classic liberal, right down the barrel, middle of the bell curve, liberals, liberal, right? I mean, pretty much on every issue that liberals care about, they endorse it. That they're getting canceled and called, fascists or racists or misogynists is astonishing. This is, guys, stop doing this. These are people on our team. Right? This is not helping. But that's the problem with extremism.
All right, guys, that was Michael Shermer. Michael, thank you very much for coming in. I hope you sell a lot of these books. That book so far I've read is quite amazing. There's so many more questions to ask. Conspiracy, why the rational people believe the irrational. You'll get all the answers, no matter what conspiracy theory you have in your mind, no matter what arguments you think that support your conspiracy theory. Read this book and then come and have a chat with me. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
Ta-da. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.